You're nothing. You hear me? You were trash before I picked you up, and you'll be trash when I throw you out.
That was Bradley Ashford talking to his wife in a courthouse hallway, loud enough for everyone to hear. His father, Garrison, leaned in with a smirk.
Honey, where your kind comes from, you should be grateful my son even looked your way.
Then Bradley did something that made the whole hallway go silent. He looked Willa dead in the eyes and spat at her feet. A clerk gasped. A young attorney quietly reached for her phone. Nobody stepped in. And Willa, she just stood there, still, silent. Not a tear, not a flinch. Now, what Bradley didn't know was that in exactly 45 minutes, someone was going to walk through that courtroom door. And the moment she did, every word he just said was going to cost him everything. Yeah, that right there, big mistake. Let's see what happens next. To understand how Willa Carter ended up standing in that hallway, we need to go back 4 years. Washington, D.C., a warm October evening. A charity gala for children's literacy held in a rooftop venue overlooking the Capitol Dome. String lights hung between columns. Glasses clinked. The air smelled like expensive perfume and autumn rain. Willa was 28, sharp, ambitious. She graduated top of her class from Howard University School of Law. She had a rising career at one of D.C.'s most respected human rights firms. She had a mother who sat on the federal bench, Judge Diane Carter, one of the most respected jurists in the state of Virginia. But Willa never talked about that. She didn't want to be the judge's daughter. She wanted her own name, her own path. That night, a man walked up to her at the bar. Tall, confident, easy smile. His name was Bradley Ashford. He didn't talk about money. He didn't name drop his father's real estate empire. He asked Willa about her work. He listened. He said things like, "That's incredible. You're actually making a difference." He leaned in when she spoke. He remembered details. 3 weeks later, he told her, "I don't need my family to accept you. I just need you." Willa fell in love with that man. The man who seemed brave enough to break away from his family's mold. The man who made her feel seen. They married 14 months later. But here's the thing about masks. They always slip. After the wedding, Bradley moved Willa to Richmond, Virginia, close to the Ashford family estate, close to his father, Garrison. And that's when everything started to shift. It didn't happen overnight. It never does. First, it was small things. At a family dinner, Garrison raised his glass and said, "Well, Bradley, you certainly went the exotic route." Everyone laughed. Bradley squeezed Willa's hand under the table and whispered, "He's just old-fashioned. Ignore it." Then Bradley's mother started mispronouncing Willa's name. Willa became Walla or Willa May every single time. Willa corrected her once. Bradley's mother smiled and said, "Oh, I'm terrible with unusual names." At a holiday party, a guest asked Willa to refill her wine glass. She thought Willa was the help. Bradley's response? "Babe, don't make it a thing." Each time, the knife went a little deeper, and each time, Bradley handed her a reason to ignore the bleeding. She told herself she was being too sensitive. She told herself love required patience. She gave up her position at the firm. She managed Bradley's social calendar. She hosted dinners for Garrison's business contacts. She smiled through every insult, every joke, every look that lasted a beat too long. She didn't fall in love with the man who spat at her in that courthouse hallway. She fell in love with a man who died somewhere between D.C. and Richmond. And she spent 3 years mourning him before she even realized he was gone. Now let's talk about the morning when everything finally broke. Richmond, Virginia, 6:15 a.m., the Ashford residence, a 5-bedroom colonial on 3 acres of manicured lawn. The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee and silence. Willa sat alone at the marble island. Bradley's side of the bed hadn't been touched. Again. His coffee mug sat in the cabinet, untouched for weeks. The house was immaculate and completely empty of warmth. She stared at their wedding photo on the wall, Bradley's arm around her, both of them laughing. She couldn't remember the last time he'd touched her like that. Her mother, Diane, had never liked Bradley. She'd said it once, calmly, before the wedding. "Baby, a man who hides you from his family isn't protecting you. He's ashamed of you." Willa had dismissed it as overprotective. Now that sentence sat in her chest like a stone she couldn't swallow. It started with the credit card statement. Willa wasn't snooping. She was organizing tax documents in Bradley's home office when a folder slipped off the desk. Inside were 3 months of statements she'd never seen, a separate account, one she didn't know existed. The charges told a story. Dinner at a French restaurant in Georgetown, $380. A weekend stay at a boutique hotel in Charlottesville, $850. A jewelry purchase from a store Willa had never heard of, $2,200. None of it was for her. She kept flipping. More dinners, more hotels, a spa package, flowers delivered to an address in Richmond she didn't recognize. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just kept reading. Then she found the texts. Bradley had left his iPad synced to his phone. Willa opened the messages and found a thread with someone named Jacqueline, a woman from his social circle. The messages were flirtatious, explicit, but the ones that cut deepest weren't the romantic ones. They were the ones about her. "She's so clueless, it's almost sad," Bradley had written. "My little charity case. Doesn't even know what fork to use at dinner, LOL. Jacqueline replied with a laughing emoji. Then, "Why don't you just leave her?" Bradley's answer. "And give her half? No chance. She'll get bored and crawl back to wherever she came from." Willa read that message 3 times. Each time, something inside her shifted. Not broke, shifted, like a door that had been stuck for years, finally swinging open. She closed the iPad, put the statements back, walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and drank it slowly. Then she picked up her phone and called Simone Lawson. Simone was a divorce attorney Willa had met at a legal conference years ago. Black woman, early 40s, known for being calm, methodical, and absolutely relentless in court. "Simone, it's Willa Carter. I need to file for divorce, and I need it done quietly." Simone didn't ask why. She just said, "Come to my office tomorrow at 9. Bring everything you have." That night, Willa slept on her side of the bed. Bradley came home at 11:30, smelling like bourbon and someone else's perfume. He didn't say a word. Neither did she. 2 weeks later, Bradley was served. He was sitting at his father's dining table when the process server walked in. Garrison was mid-sentence about a new development deal. Bradley opened the envelope, read the first line, and his face went from confused to furious in under 3 seconds. He didn't feel sadness. He didn't feel regret. He felt rage. Because divorce meant financial disclosure, depositions, forensic accountants going through every transaction, every shell company, every deal his father had ever made. And the Ashford family had a lot to hide. Bradley called Garrison before the process server left the driveway. She filed. "Get Hale on the phone. Now." Preston Hale was the kind of lawyer people hired when they didn't want justice. They wanted destruction. Mid-50s, silver hair, cold eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd built his career on making divorce proceedings so brutal, so expensive, so psychologically devastating that the other side simply gave up. Within 48 hours, the strategy was set. Preston laid it out over scotch in Garrison's study. "We don't negotiate. We don't settle. We bury her. Motion after motion until she can't afford to breathe. We freeze her accounts. We make her life so miserable she walks away with nothing just to make it stop." Bradley nodded. Garrison smiled. "That's what I pay you for." The first court appearance came 3 weeks later, a preliminary hearing on temporary orders. Bradley and Preston walked into the courtroom like they owned the building. Preston filed a thick stack of documents accusing Willa of erratic and unstable behavior, financial irresponsibility, and being prone to irrational outbursts. Every word was calculated, every phrase designed to paint a specific picture. The angry black woman. They never said it outright. They didn't have to. The code was loud enough. But Preston wasn't finished. He stood before Judge Whitfield and added, with practiced concern, "Your Honor, we have serious questions about Mrs. Ashford's emotional fitness. Her behavior in recent months has been unpredictable and, frankly, alarming. We believe the court should consider a psychological evaluation." Simone was on her feet immediately. "Objection. There is zero documentation supporting these claims. This is character assassination, not legal argument." Judge Whitfield, not Diane, a different judge, studied both sides. He allowed the proceedings but issued a warning. "Both parties will substantiate claims with evidence. I won't tolerate theatrics. This is a courtroom, not a stage." Preston smiled politely. "Of course, Your Honor." Willa sat with her hands flat on the table. Navy dress, no jewelry. Her face was calm, but beneath the table, her right hand was shaking. Simone noticed and gently pressed her own hand over Willa's. A silent message: "We're not done yet." After the hearing, Bradley caught Willa alone in the hallway near the restroom. He leaned against the wall, blocking her path, arms crossed, that smirk she used to mistake for confidence. "You think anyone's going to believe you over me?" Willa tried to step around him. He shifted his weight to block her again. "Look around, Willa. Look at where you are." He gestured at the marble walls, the oil portraits of old judges. "This is my world. My father built half the buildings in this city. You think a courtroom is going to save you? Baby, I own the courtroom." He leaned closer. She could smell his cologne, the same one he wore on their first date. Her stomach turned. "Walk away now. Take whatever scraps I offer, because if you keep pushing this, I will make sure you leave with nothing. Not a dollar, not a shred of dignity. Nothing." He straightened his tie, turned, and walked away whistling. Willa stood there for a full 10 seconds, staring at the spot where he'd been. Her pulse hammered in her throat. Her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. She wouldn't give this hallway that. She walked to her car, sat behind the wheel, and gripped it until her knuckles turned white. The next blow came fast. Preston filed an emergency motion claiming Willa was hiding marital assets in a secret account. The claim was fabricated. No secret account, no hidden money. But the motion didn't need to be true. It just needed to be filed. A sympathetic judge, one who golfed with Garrison on weekends, heard the motion on an expedited basis. Willa's bank accounts were frozen within 72 hours. Overnight, her life collapsed. She couldn't pay rent, couldn't buy groceries, couldn't put gas in her car. She stood in a pharmacy trying to buy headache medicine and watched her card get declined. The cashier looked at her with pity. Willa put the bottle back on the shelf and walked out. She called Nina Douglas, her best friend since college. Nina didn't hesitate. "Get your bag. Guest room's already made up." Willa moved in that night with one suitcase and a secure encrypted hard drive. That drive was her insurance policy. For months, quietly, carefully, Willa had been collecting evidence. Financial records showing hidden accounts, screenshots of every degrading text, voice recordings of Bradley's threats, captured legally under Virginia's one-party consent law. And something bigger, documents showing Garrison's real estate empire was built on decades of discriminatory lending targeting black neighborhoods. She hadn't played any of it yet. She was waiting. That evening, alone in Nina's guest room, she called her mother. "Mama, I'm okay. I just wanted to hear your voice." Judge Diane Carter was quiet for a long moment. She could hear the exhaustion, the weight, the things Willa wasn't saying. "I'm here, baby, whenever you're ready." Willa hung up and pressed the phone against her chest. She wasn't ready, not yet, but she was close. Bradley Ashford didn't just want to win the divorce. He wanted to erase Willa Carter from existence, and he had the money to try. In the 8 weeks following the preliminary hearing, Preston Hale filed 14 separate motions. 14. Each one more absurd than the last. Each one designed not to win, but to drain. Motion to compel Willa to return stolen Ashford family heirlooms, artwork and jewelry that had been documented wedding gifts given to her in writing. Motion to subpoena her former colleagues at the D.C. firm, claiming she had a pattern of hostile workplace behavior. Motion to restrict her travel outside of Virginia. Motion to demand a full psychiatric evaluation. Motion to reclassify her personal belongings as marital property. Motion to challenge the validity of her original divorce filing. None of them had legal merit. Every single one cost money to fight. And that was the point. Simone Lawson sat across from Willa in her office, a stack of filings between them like a paper wall. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Cold coffee sat untouched on the desk. Outside the window, a garbage truck rumbled past. The world kept moving. Willa's had stopped. "He's not trying to win in court," Simone said, tapping the stack with her pen. "He's trying to win by exhaustion. Every motion we respond to costs us time and money we don't have. That's the game. File, drain, repeat until we break." Willa stared at the stack. "So what do? We survive, and we wait for him to overplay his hand, because men like Bradley always do." But surviving was getting harder by the day. Preston's tactics went beyond the courtroom. He subpoenaed 3 of Willa's former colleagues from her D.C. law firm, not because he expected to find anything useful, but because the process itself was punishment. Each subpoena meant time off work, legal consultations, uncomfortable questions from employers who didn't want their firm dragged into someone else's divorce. One of them, a junior associate named Bridget, called Willa in tears. "They're asking if you ever raised your voice in a meeting, if you were difficult to work with. They asked if you had anger issues. Willa, what is happening?" Willa apologized. She could hear the confusion in Bridget's voice, the fear, the betrayal of being pulled into something she had nothing to do with. Preston Hale was using innocent people as collateral damage, and there was nothing Willa could do to stop it. She hung up and sat on the edge of Nina's guest bed, staring at the wall. The room smelled like lavender dryer sheets and someone else's life. She pressed her palms against her knees to keep them from bouncing. Then the social warfare began. The Ashford family's circle closed ranks around Bradley like a fortress. Willa had spent 3 years building relationships with these people. She'd hosted their charity events, organized their galas, remembered their children's birthdays and their anniversary dates. She'd handwritten thank you cards after every dinner party. She'd driven 2 hours to deliver flowers when one of them was hospitalized. None of it mattered, not a single bit. At a fundraiser for the Richmond Children's Hospital, an event Willa had co-chaired the previous year, she was not invited. But someone on the planning committee accidentally sent her an invitation. Willa RSVP'd. She bought a dress. She arranged a ride. The morning of the event, she received an email. "Dear Mrs. Ashford, we regret to inform you that your invitation was sent in error. We hope you understand." She sat on her bed reading that email 4 times. Each time the words hit differently. Not anger, something deeper. The slow, quiet violence of being told you never belonged. At the gala itself, which Nina heard about through a friend, guests openly discussed Willa. One woman, a developer's wife with diamonds on every finger, was overheard saying, "I always knew she was after the money. Girls like her always are. You can take the girl out of the hood, but you know how that goes." Another laughed and said, "Bradley's too nice. He should have had a prenup. His daddy tried to warn him." The whisper campaign was surgical, precise, designed to strip Willa of every social connection she'd built. Her phone stopped ringing. Invitations dried up. Women she considered friends unfollowed her on social media without a word. One blocked her entirely. She was being erased from the world she'd spent 3 years building for Bradley. Quietly, efficiently, like she'd never existed at all. But the worst was yet to come. 3 days before the major asset division hearing, Willa arrived at the courthouse early. She wore a gray blazer and carried a leather folder with her documents. Simone walked beside her, reviewing notes. The morning air was damp. The courthouse smelled like floor wax and old wood. The hallway was busy. Attorneys moved between courtrooms. A court reporter adjusted her equipment near the elevators. A family sat on a wooden bench, the mother holding a sleeping toddler. Then, Bradley appeared at the far end of the corridor. Preston Hale beside him. Garrison a few steps behind, hands in his pockets, watching like a man surveying property he already owned. All three of them walked in sync, expensive shoes clicking on marble. Bradley walked straight toward Willa, not to the courtroom, not to a conference room, directly to her. Simone saw it. Willa, keep walking, don't engage. But Bradley was faster. He stepped in front of her, blocking the path. His cologne hit her first, sharp, expensive, suffocating. The same scent from 100 dinners she wished she could forget. He didn't whisper this time. He wanted every single person in that hallway to hear. You know what your problem is, Willa? You actually believed you belonged here, in this family, in this neighborhood, in this courthouse. He laughed, a short, ugly bark that bounced off the marble walls. You were nothing before me, and you'll leave with nothing, just like your people always do. A clerk behind the reception desk stopped typing mid-word. A young attorney near the water fountain turned around slowly. The mother on the bench pulled her toddler closer. The hallway went dead silent. Then Bradley looked down at Willa's shoes. Nice shoes. Shoes she'd bought with her own money before the accounts were frozen. The last pair she could afford. And he spat. Not on her. At her feet. A thick, deliberate glob that landed on the marble floor inches from her toes. The sound of it hitting stone echoed in the silence. Garrison chuckled softly from behind, shaking his head like a man watching a mildly amusing television show. Preston Hale looked away, not shocked, just inconvenienced, like a man who'd seen this before and learned it wasn't his problem. The young attorney near the water fountain, a woman named Casey, had her phone out. She'd started recording the moment Bradley raised his voice. She caught everything, the words, the spit, the laughter, Bradley walking away, adjusting his cufflinks, Garrison patting his son on the shoulder, Preston checking his watch. Willa didn't move. She looked down at the spit on the marble. Then she looked straight ahead. Her eyes were dry. Her jaw was set like concrete. She breathed in through her nose, slow, controlled, deliberate, and she kept standing. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not here, not ever. Simone was already on the phone. Within an hour, she filed an emergency complaint for witness intimidation and harassment. Written statements from 3 bystanders, the clerk, Casey, and another attorney who'd witnessed the scene. She requested an immediate hearing and a protective order. The complaint was filed correctly. The evidence was clear. The witnesses were credible. Any functioning system would have acted within 24 hours. And then, nothing. Garrison Ashford made one phone call, just one, to a man named Holt, a local political figure who sat on the county judicial oversight committee. They'd known each other for 30 years. Garrison had funded his last 2 campaigns. The complaint was placed under review. No hearing was scheduled, no protective order issued, no timeline given. Just a quiet, bureaucratic burial. Simone slammed her palm on her desk when she got the news. Her coffee cup rattled. Under review. That's their favorite phrase. It means nobody's looking at it and nobody ever will. She looked at Willa, still sitting in the chair across from her, still wearing the gray blazer, still holding the leather folder, still holding herself together by sheer force of will. Willa, I need to be honest with you. I've deferred my fees. I'll keep deferring them as long as I can, but we are running out of runway. He's outspending us 10 to 1. His father has judges on speed dial. If something doesn't change, and I mean very soon, they will bury us in paper and nobody will ever dig us out. Willa was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the stack of motions. She looked at Simone's tired eyes. She looked at her own hands, steady for the first time all week. Something will change, she said. All right, I need to stop right here. This man just spat at his own wife in a courthouse and walked away laughing, and nobody did a thing. Like, are we serious right now? Because I'm watching this and my blood is actually boiling. Then, 2 days before the hearing, something did change. The case was reassigned. The original presiding judge, Judge Whitfield, recused himself due to a scheduling conflict with the federal case. The matter was transferred to a different courtroom in the downtown federal building. A new judge would preside. The name had not yet been announced. Willa received the reassignment notice by email at 9:14 in the morning. She was sitting at Nina's kitchen table, eating toast. Rain tapped against the window. The kitchen smelled like butter and black coffee. She opened the notification, read the courtroom number, and stopped chewing. Her expression changed. Not a shock, not fear, something quieter, something that looked almost like the faintest trace of hope, the kind you're afraid to name because naming it might make it disappear. She set her phone face down on the table, finished her toast, took a slow sip of coffee. Nina looked at her from across the table. Everything okay? Willa set the mug down gently. Yeah, everything's fine. But her hand, for the first time in weeks, had stopped shaking. The morning of the hearing, the Richmond sky was overcast. Gray clouds pressed low over the federal building like a ceiling about to collapse. The air smelled like wet pavement and diesel exhaust from the buses idling on Main Street. Bradley Ashford arrived at 9:15. Custom navy suit, gold cufflinks, Italian leather shoes that clicked on the courthouse steps like a metronome of entitlement. He paused at the entrance, buttoned his jacket, and smiled at his own reflection in the glass door. Garrison walked 2 steps behind him, silver hair combed back, cashmere overcoat folded over one arm. He moved like a man who had never entered a building without owning a piece of it. Preston Hale was already inside, setting up at the defense table. 3 leather binders, a stack of fresh motions, a legal pad with notes written in tight, precise handwriting. He looked up when Bradley entered and gave a single nod. Everything's ready. Bradley sat down and leaned back in his chair. He loosened his tie 1/2 inch. He looked around the courtroom the way a man looks at a restaurant he's about to buy, already calculating what he'd change. Relax, Preston whispered. New judge, new game. We file the recusal motion if we don't like what we see. Either way, this ends today. Bradley cracked his knuckles. It's better. On the other side of the aisle, Willa entered quietly, gray blazer again, the same leather folder. Simone beside her, calm and precise as always. They sat down without a word. Willa's hands were flat on the table. Her back was straight. She didn't look at Bradley. She didn't look at Garrison. She stared at the empty bench where the judge would sit. Her expression gave away nothing. The gallery filled slowly. A few spectators, 2 journalists from local papers who caught wind of the Ashford divorce. Old money plus racial tension was a story that wrote itself. Near the back, the young attorney Casey slipped in quietly. She sat in the last row, phone in her bag, watching. The courtroom settled. Conversations faded to whispers. Whispers faded to silence. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The clock on the wall ticked past 9:28, 9:29. Then the bailiff, Deputy Craig Fulton, stood. He straightened his uniform, he took a breath, and he said the words that would change everything. All rise, the Honorable Judge Diane Carter presiding. For exactly 2 seconds, nothing happened. The name floated in the air like smoke. Bradley was adjusting his cufflinks. Preston was flipping a page. Garrison was checking his phone. Then the door behind the bench opened. A black woman in her early 60s stepped through. She wore judicial robes that moved like dark water around her frame. Her hair was pulled back. Her posture was absolute. She carried no notes, no folders, just herself and 40 years of earned authority. She stepped up to the bench. She sat down. She placed her hands flat on the surface and looked out at the courtroom with eyes that had seen 10,000 liars and remembered every single one. Bradley's hand stopped moving. His cufflink hung half-turned. He stared at the judge, then at Willa, then back at the judge. Carter. Diane Carter. The blood drained from his face so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. He grabbed Preston's arm. His fingers dug in hard enough to wrinkle the wool. Carter, he hissed. As in, that's her mother? Preston's pen stopped mid-stroke. He looked up at the bench, then at Willa. His jaw tightened. Garrison lowered his phone slowly. For the first time in the entire proceedings, his expression cracked. Just for a moment, a flash of something he hadn't felt in decades. Uncertainty. Willa didn't look up. She didn't need to. She sat with her hands on the table, her eyes forward, her breathing steady. She already knew. The courtroom was dead silent. Not even the clock seemed to tick. Preston recovered first. He stood, buttoning his jacket with hands that weren't quite steady. Your Honor, we respectfully request an immediate recusal on the grounds of familial conflict of interest. The respondent is, as the court is aware, the biological daughter of the presiding judge. Judge Diane Carter looked at Preston Hale the way a surgeon looks at a dull scalpel. Calm, unimpressed, patient. Mr. Hale, I'm fully aware of the relationship. I consulted with the Judicial Ethics Board before accepting this assignment. This hearing concerns asset division and financial disclosures, civil matters, not criminal. Both parties were notified of the reassignment through proper channels. If you wish to file a formal recusal motion with legal grounds, you have 24 hours to do so. She paused. Let the silence settle. In the meantime, we will proceed. Preston opened his mouth, closed it, sat down. Bradley was gripping the edge of the table so hard, his knuckles had gone white. His breathing was shallow. The confidence that had carried him into this room had evaporated completely. Then Judge Carter spoke again. Her voice was steady, almost gentle, but underneath it was steel. Before we address any pending motions, I want to note that I have received and reviewed a formal complaint regarding an incident of witness intimidation that occurred in the courthouse corridor. I have reviewed the security camera footage. I have reviewed 3 sworn witness statements. I have also reviewed a personal recording submitted as supporting evidence. She looked directly at Bradley. Mr. Ashford, you will remain silent while this evidence is presented to the court. The screen beside the bench flickered to life, and the footage began to play. Bradley's voice filled the courtroom, loud, clear, unmistakable. You were nothing before me, and you'll leave with nothing, just like your people always do. Then the spit, the laughter, the fist bump walk away, Garrison's chuckle, Preston checking his watch. Every person in that courtroom watched in silence. The journalist scribbled furiously. Casey sat forward in her seat. The clerk covered her mouth. Garrison Ashford uncrossed his arms. He shifted in his seat. For the first time, he looked like a man who realized the room was no longer his. Bradley stared at the screen with the hollow expression of someone watching his own future collapse in real time. And Willa Carter sat perfectly still, hands on the table, back straight, eyes forward, the same posture she'd held in that hallway. But now, for the first time, she wasn't standing alone. The footage ended. The screen went black. The The silence that followed was louder than anything Bradley had ever said. Judge Diane Carter removed her reading glasses and set them on the bench with a soft click. She folded her hands. Based on the evidence presented, including security footage, 3 sworn witness statements, and a corroborating personal recording, I am issuing the following orders, effective immediately. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. First, a temporary restraining order against Bradley Ashford. He is to maintain a distance of no less than 500 feet from Willa Carter at all times. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. Bradley's jaw clenched. Preston placed a hand on his arm, a warning. Second, the freeze on Mrs. Carter's bank accounts was based on claims unsupported by any documentary evidence. The freeze is lifted, effective immediately. Third, I am ordering a full forensic audit of all financial disclosures submitted by the Ashford family. My review has revealed significant inconsistencies. An independent forensic accounting firm will be appointed by this court. Garrison shifted forward in the gallery. For the first time in his life, a judge was pointing a flashlight directly at the empire he'd built in the dark. Fourth, Judge Carter turned to Preston Hale. Mr. Hale, I have reviewed every motion you filed in this case. 14 in 8 weeks, each one lacking substantive legal merit. Several appear designed to impose financial and psychological burden rather than advance legitimate claims. I am referring your conduct to the Virginia State Bar for formal review. Preston's pen slipped from his fingers and rolled across the table. He didn't pick it up. Then Bradley broke. He shoved his chair back. The legs screeched against the floor. He stood, face red, veins visible on his neck, and pointed at the bench. This is a setup. You can't do this. She's your daughter. This whole thing is rigged. Judge Carter did not flinch. She looked at Bradley the way a lighthouse looks at a storm, unmoved, undimmed, unimpressed. Mr. Ashford, you are in my courtroom. Sit down. This is your only warning. Preston grabbed Bradley's arm. Bradley, stop, now! Bradley yanked free and slammed his palm on the table. A water glass toppled and shattered on the floor. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Mr. Ashford, you are hereby held in contempt of court. Deputy Fulton, please remove Mr. Ashford from the courtroom. Deputy Fulton approached from the side. Sir, come with me. Bradley looked around the room. At Preston, frozen. At Garrison, already standing, heading for the door without a backward glance, phone pressed to his ear. At the journalist, writing every word. At Casey in the back row with steady eyes. And finally, at Willa. She hadn't moved. Hands on the table, back straight, eyes forward. The same posture she'd held in that hallway. But something was different now. No fear, no pain, no pleading. Just stillness. The kind that comes after a storm finally passes. Bradley opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Fulton took his arm and guided him toward the side door. His Italian shoes dragged on marble. The gold cufflinks caught the light one last time before the door closed behind him. The courtroom exhaled. Nina Douglas in the second row had tears running silently down both cheeks. Simone placed her hand over Willa's and squeezed. No words. None were needed. Judge Carter organized her papers, gave final instructions to the clerk, and set the date for the next hearing. Professional, measured, flawless. Then she stood and exited through the door behind the bench. 5 minutes later, Willa walked into the hallway. The same hallway where Bradley had spat at her feet. The same marble. The same fluorescent lights. But the air felt different, lighter. She was halfway to the elevator when she heard footsteps behind her. Measured. Familiar. Judge Diane Carter walked past her daughter without stopping. Their eyes didn't meet. No words were exchanged. But as Diane passed, her hand reached out, just barely, and brushed Willa's shoulder. 2 fingers. Half a second. A touch so light, no one else would have noticed. But Willa noticed. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she let herself breathe all the way in. A mother's love, expressed within the boundaries of duty. Silent, brief, unbreakable. What happened in that courtroom didn't stay in that courtroom. It never does. Not in the age of smartphones and social media. Not when the footage is that damning. Casey, the young attorney who'd been recording in the hallway, uploaded a 60-second clip that same evening. She didn't add commentary. She didn't need to. The video spoke for itself. Bradley's voice, the spit, the laughter, Garrison's chuckle, Preston checking his watch, and Willa standing still as a statue, refusing to break. By midnight, the clip had 40,000 views. By the next morning, it had crossed 200,000. By the end of the week, every major news outlet in Virginia had picked it up. Then the national networks followed. CNN ran a segment. MSNBC featured it in a panel discussion. The headline that stuck, the one that burned itself into the national conversation, came from the Washington Post. Husband spat at black wife in courthouse. Didn't know her mother was the judge. The internet did what the internet does. It dug. It found Bradley's social media. It found photos of him at country clubs, on golf courses, at yacht parties. It found old posts, ones he'd long forgotten, where he'd made comments about certain neighborhoods and those people and why can't they just work harder? Each screenshot was another nail. Bradley's public persona didn't just crack, it disintegrated. Former friends issued statements distancing themselves. Business associates quietly removed his name from joint ventures. The country club where he'd been a member for 15 years sent a formal letter revoking his membership. His profile on every platform was flooded with a single word, repeated thousands of times. Disgusting. And Jacqueline, the woman he'd been having an affair with, released a public statement through her publicist. 3 sentences. I have no personal relationship with Bradley Ashford. Any suggestion otherwise is false. I wish his family peace during this difficult time. Bradley read that statement sitting alone in his father's study, surrounded by bottles of scotch he'd opened but barely touched. The room smelled like old leather and failure. He called Jacqueline's number. It went straight to voicemail. He called again. Blocked. He was now exactly where he promised Willis she would end up. Alone. With nothing. Erased. But the personal fallout was just the beginning. The forensic audit that Judge Carter ordered didn't just find inconsistencies. It found a graveyard. Hidden accounts in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. Shell companies layered 3 deep, designed to obscure the movement of money. Underreported assets worth millions. And buried beneath all of it, decades of documentation that told a story far uglier than a messy divorce. Garrison Ashford's real estate empire, Ashford Properties, had been built on systematic discrimination. The auditors uncovered internal memos from the early 90s showing that company policy explicitly targeted black neighborhoods for predatory lending. Properties in those areas were appraised at artificially low values. Minority buyers were steered toward high-interest loans with balloon payments designed to fail. When borrowers defaulted, and they always defaulted because the loans were designed that way, Ashford Properties seized the homes and resold them at market value. It was a machine, a quiet, efficient, decades-long machine built to extract wealth from black communities and funnel it into the Ashford family's pockets. The forensic report was forwarded to the Virginia Attorney General's office. Within 2 weeks, a formal investigation was opened into Ashford Properties for systematic housing discrimination under the Fair Housing Act. Federal investigators from the Department of Justice joined shortly after. Garrison Ashford hired 4 attorneys, then 6, then 8. It didn't matter. The documents were clear. The pattern was undeniable. The machine was exposed, and no amount of legal firepower could stuff it back into the dark. Preston Hale had his own reckoning. The Virginia State Bar didn't just review his conduct in the Ashford case. They pulled his entire file. What they found was a pattern. Case after case where Preston had used the same playbook, filed dozens of frivolous motions, drained the opposing party's resources, weaponized the legal system against people who couldn't afford to fight back. Most of his targets were women. Many were women of color. The bar suspended Preston Hale's license pending a full disciplinary hearing. He walked out of the Bar Association building without speaking to reporters. His wire-rimmed glasses caught the sunlight. His silver hair was uncombed for the first time anyone could remember. He looked like a man who had just realized the rules applied to him too. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. It was quiet. No shouting, no theatrics, just paperwork and signatures in a conference room that smelled like printer toner and stale coffee. Willa received a substantial settlement, not because her mother was the judge. Judge Carter had recused herself from all subsequent proceedings after the initial hearing, exactly as protocol required. The settlement came because the evidence was overwhelming. The hidden accounts, the underreported assets, the fraudulent motions designed to impoverish her. Every piece of it documented, every piece of it admissible. She got the house, a significant financial sum, and full control of her future. Simone Lawson sat beside her as she signed the final document. "How do you feel?" Willa set the pen down. She looked at the signature, her name, in her handwriting, on a document that gave her back her life. "I feel like myself again." Bradley pleaded no contest to the contempt charge and the criminal intimidation complaint stemming from the hallway incident. He received a suspended sentence, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory anger management counseling. The judge who sentenced him, not Diane, noted in his remarks that the defendant displayed a pattern of behavior reflecting profound disregard for the dignity of others and the sanctity of this court. Bradley said nothing. He signed the papers and left through a side door, avoiding the cameras waiting out front. Garrison's world continued to collapse in slow motion. Former clients filed lawsuits, dozens of them. Families who'd lost their homes to predatory loans. Communities that had been hollowed out by decades of exploitation. A class action suit was organized within 3 months. The Virginia Attorney General announced a consent decree requiring Ashford Properties to pay $12 million in restitution to affected families. The company was placed under federal oversight for a minimum of 10 years. Garrison was barred from serving as an officer or director of any real estate company in the state of Virginia. He sat in his study the night the decree was announced, staring at the portrait of his father that hung above the fireplace. 3 generations of Ashford wealth, 3 generations of Ashford power, all of it crumbling because his son couldn't keep his mouth shut in a hallway. But that wasn't quite right, was it? The rot didn't start with Bradley. Bradley was just the one who finally said the quiet part out loud. The rot had been there all along, in every rigged loan, every stolen home, every black family that never got a fair chance. Bradley just pulled back the curtain, and behind it, Willa Carter was still standing. 6 months later, a Tuesday morning in October, the kind of morning where the Virginia sun cuts through the trees and makes everything look like it's been dipped in gold. Willa Carter stood on the steps of the Richmond Federal Courthouse, the same steps she'd climbed dozens of times during the worst chapter of her life. The same marble, the same columns, the same heavy doors. But she wasn't here for a hearing, not today. She was here for work. A small brass plaque beside the entrance of a ground floor office read, Carter Legal Aid Initiative, Advocacy for Women in Crisis. Willa had founded it 3 months ago, using a portion of her settlement. The organization provided free legal representation to women, particularly women of color, trapped in abusive divorce proceedings. Women who couldn't afford attorneys. Women whose husbands used the legal system as a weapon. Women who stood alone in courthouse hallways with no one beside them. Women like she had been. The office was small, 2 desks, a donated coffee maker that worked on good days, a waiting room with 4 chairs and a box of tissues on the side table. But every week, those chairs were full. Every single week. Willa opened the door, set her bag down, and looked at the day's schedule. 3 consultations, a court filing, a phone call with the state legislator about a new bill. 2 bills, actually. The Ashford case had sent ripples through the Virginia legal system that nobody expected. The first proposed stricter penalties for attorneys who filed frivolous motions designed to financially exhaust opposing parties. The second expanded federal oversight of discriminatory lending practices in residential real estate. Neither bill mentioned the Ashford name. Neither needed to. Everyone knew where the conversation started. Preston Hale's law license remained suspended. 18 months. The disciplinary board cited a systematic pattern of abusive litigation tactics targeting vulnerable parties. He closed his practice. His office on Main Street sat empty, a for lease sign taped to the window. Garrison Ashford's empire was unrecognizable. Ashford Properties operated under a federal consent decree, $12 million in restitution, 10 years of oversight. Garrison was barred from holding any executive position in real estate. The man who once controlled half the development deals in Virginia now spent his days in meetings with compliance officers and federal auditors. And Bradley was last seen listing the family vacation home in the Outer Banks for sale. He needed the money for legal fees. His social media accounts were deleted. His country club membership was gone. His friends had disappeared like smoke. He was alone. Exactly as alone as he promised Willa she would be. But this story isn't really about Bradley. It never was. It's about a woman who stood in a hallway while her husband spat at her feet and didn't break. Not because she couldn't feel it, but because she knew that breaking was exactly what they wanted. It's about a mother who walked past her daughter in a corridor and with 2 fingers on her shoulder said everything words couldn't. I see you. I'm proud of you. I'm here. It's about a system that failed and the people who forced it to correct itself. Not with violence, not with revenge, with evidence, with patience, with the quiet, stubborn belief that the truth, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. Judge Diane Carter gave one interview after the case. She didn't discuss her daughter. She didn't discuss Bradley. She spoke about the law. Justice is not a privilege. It is a right, and it must be defended most fiercely for those who have the fewest defenders. That quote sat on a small card on Willa's desk, tucked between a photograph of her mother and a coffee mug that read, Counselor at Law. She looked at it every morning, not because she needed reminding, but because some truths are worth reading twice. Look, this story is fiction, but I'm not gonna lie, it messed me up a little. Because the humiliation, the system protecting the wrong person, that's real. And not everyone's got a mom in a robe. So honestly, this one really got me thinking.